everybody, to the Topical Minds podcast. I am your host, Abdullah Califado, and this is episode number 6. On today's episode, we will be talking about a topic that does not get enough awareness. Mental health issues are a part and parcel of life. I'm extremely pleased to have a guest on who is a passionate mental health advocate. Rebekah is a lifestyle and mental health blogger based out of Houston, Texas. Her mission is to create a community to foster non-judgmental conversations around mental health and the destigmatization of mental illness. So welcome, Rebekah, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me today.
So first of all, I did want to just ask about the tropical storm. Is it Nicholas that's hitting Houston at the moment?
Yeah. So I lived inside the Loop area, so we didn't really struggle as much with it, but the coastal areas had a lot more problems. I think there's still some people that don't have power, but for the most part, it wasn't a horrible storm. So that's good. Everyone was well prepared. Obviously, there are still some people who are struggling with storm surge and struggling with power outages, but they're trying to get people up and running as soon as possible. So thank you for asking about that and your concern.
Are storms a common occurrence in Houston?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah, we have a good amount of them. We're pretty close to Galveston, which is coastal, like the Gulf of Mexico. And so we frequently get tropical storms and hurricanes. The last big one we had was Hurricane Harvey, and that was in 2017. So I've only lived in Houston for about 8 years, but that was the first one that I experienced. And for that to be the first one, I think the record was like 50 inches of water in some places. So that was quite an experience for me because I'd never seen an amount of rain like that before. I'd never seen where you walk outside and your streets are no longer streets. They're just oceans or just water everywhere.
Yeah, I remember back in 2019, in the summer of 2019, I was in the States for my sister's wedding. So we had just been in Ohio, and then we did a family trip. We went to New Orleans, and we happened to get a hurricane at the exact same time that we were there, and we had no idea that this was coming. But I remember this city sort of shutting down, there being all of these different warnings, and of course then seeing the impact of the actual hurricane. So that was the first time that I got to experience it. I did my undergrad in the States, but where I studied, we didn't really get any hurricanes as such. Like, we had fairly decent weather. I studied in Virginia.
Okay.
But yeah, in New Orleans, that was the first time that I actually experienced it, and it was quite, I wouldn't say I was frightened. It was a mild hurricane. It wasn't too crazy, but just being there and experiencing it was quite an experience. Before we get into your whole experience in the blogging space and being an advocate for mental health, I'm just curious to get your thoughts on the whole global warming situation.
That is a $1 million question, isn't it? It is such a controversial question. People's opinions differ greatly. And some people are, tending towards the science side of it. Other people are not. And it's just so interesting to see how divided this issue has. I think there's some people that want to place blame elsewhere. They want to not take personal responsibility for their actions in global warming. Like, they don't want to think about the way they use cars or the amount of trash they create and the amount of, fast fashion they can consume. Everyone some of those people just want to place blame elsewhere, off of themselves and really release that personal responsibility. But I do not think that we are not to blame here. Like, I think that we do the things we've done, the way we've consumed fossil fuels, the way that we use cars, the way that people use transportation, the way that we, create so much trash. I know that I am guilty of creating too much trash and using just like paper products because of convenience and things like that. I think we definitely could do a much better job of the way we consume and consume less and think more, eco-friendly about the way we shop. But I understand how difficult it is because, fast fashion is inexpensive and convenient, and Amazon and others like Shein and things like that. It's so easy to buy those things and be like, oh, this is just a $6 outfit or whatever, and not really think about the impact that has. But then also the other coin of that is people, don't have that luxury. It's classist to say that, we should get rid of all fast fashion and be only eco-friendly, because some people really can't afford what it costs now to consume less and to consume more sustainable fashion or sustainable products in general.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the IPCC report, so this is a report that came out last month by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And essentially, it's a UN based organization that released a report on the impact of, or an update on global warming.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, one of their main takeaways, and really you can't dispute it at the moment, is the fact that humans, without a doubt, contribute to global warming. Like, there's no way you can dispute that just based on the findings of the report. And I actually had a guest on, one of my former professors at Concordia, who teaches a course on sustainable investing, something that I was interested in. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I took his course is when I really sort of came across the impact of rising GHG emissions on just the planet and how it's impacting our day-to-day lives, either through a lot of the extreme weather events that we see, or just a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
issues that we are seeing. But one of the things that was clear in that report is, if you previously felt as though human beings are not impacting or contributing to rising temperatures, that's sort of been dispelled now. So I think it's a report that's fairly eye-opening. So for any of those who are interested in some of those takeaways, like, that report is available online. It's extremely detailed. There's a summary. I would advise you to take a look at that, because I don't think you'll have time to go through I believe it's like 4,000 pages worth of information.
Oh, wow.
So it's fairly in depth. But I wanted to get into your journey. So you started blogging back in 2017.
Yep.
And we briefly spoke about what drove you to that, what motivated you to do that, but I'd love to get more into it here.
So I had just gotten my graduate degree. I was going to graduate school and I was working full time. And in the process, I finally graduated. But in the process of like going through that, I kept thinking, oh, I wish I had free time. Oh, what I would do with free time. It would be wonderful to have more free time. And then I graduated, I had a job, and I had free time. And it just felt like a void. I felt empty with this free time. I didn't know what to do with it. I was overwhelmed by it. And so I knew that I liked writing. So I decided I'm going to start writing again. Maybe I'll start a blog. And I am a petite woman, and I've always found it hard to find clothes that fit correctly for petite women. And so I thought I'd start a petite fashion blog. I just thought it'd be fun for me, just something to like blow off steam. And then I really started digging into like growing on Instagram and growing on the internet and in social media. And I came across like all this artificial growth strategies and like all these inauthentic ways to grow and what people were doing. And, I just came to the point where I didn't have money to buy new clothes all the time and to keep talking about new things. And it just felt so shallow, and like I'm a much more in-depth person than just this part of me that I was showing. And when I went to college in like 2009, I was diagnosed with anxiety. And I remember back then nobody was really talking about mental health. It was kind of just something you dealt with, but you didn't really talk to people about it. It was kind of shameful. It was like a taboo subject in our society. And I remember how isolating that felt for me, because there was nobody to go to. For me, my problems were mostly like physical, somatic problems. So I had a lot of stomach problems that I couldn't figure out where they came from. And I would go to gastroenterologists and other doctors, and I would have tests run, and we could never, pinpoint anything. And it was so frustrating to finally get a diagnosis that, this is a mental thing, because when you find out it's mental, it's a lot more difficult for you to cope with. It's not like a pill you can take necessarily. It's not like one test or a surgery you can have. It's like something that you're going to have to manage with different coping strategies, possibly medication, therapy, whichever way you want to go. So that was a hard part. And then basically I just wanted to create this community that shared, in talking about mental health and saying that it's okay to talk about it. It's okay not to be okay sometimes. I think an interesting thing that's happened during COVID is that a lot more people are experiencing anxiety and depression than ever had before. It's not a great thing. I'm not happy about it, but you see society's mindset kind of change about it because celebrities are speaking out about it. Like Simone Biles had that mental health event in the Olympics, which is a very wide stage for this mental health conversation to come about. And just more people, from the social isolation of the pandemic are dealing with mental health events. And I think we're getting to the point where we can start having that compassion and empathy for people that maybe we didn't have before because no one kind of understood what was going on. So I think with, building communities online, and I'm not the only one that has a community, there's a fairly large mental health community. I think something about millennials and Gen Z is that we're having these conversations more. We're not so ashamed to say that we go to therapy. In fact, we're like talking about it. We're sharing memes about it. We're sharing videos about it. So I think that's a good thing that's coming about as these conversations are happening more frequently. And maybe just the younger generations are posing them for the older generations. And yeah, there's some people in like my parents' generation that still don't quite understand it, still see it as like a shameful thing. I know in my family it was a struggle because I had family members that just be like, oh, we're nickels, we don't have these problems, like these are problems we don't have, you just like suck it up, you get it done, like depression doesn't exist kind of mentality. And so just kind of like reinventing that conversation and bringing it back and saying, these are real conversations, these are real problems that people have, I'm not the only one that has it. And just building that conversation and that community around having these non-judgmental conversations and allowing for all walks of life, regardless of who you are, what your race is, what your gender, what your sexual orientation, regardless of who you are, you have a safe space on the internet and our community to come in and have those conversations and be supported.
Why do you think there's such a why do you think mental health is such a taboo topic? Is it because if you say you are dealing with mental health issues that perhaps you are in a way saying that you are a weak person? What's driving that stigmatism?
Yeah, I think there has been a level of that thought that that's a weakness, like a society. The thing about mental illnesses is they're kind of invisible, right? I could have high functioning anxiety and depression and you would never know it. And then if I ever said, oh, I'm not feeling well today, you'd be like, oh, well, just like buck up or like go for a run or do something. And people don't quite understand illnesses they can't see. So I think that's part of it being invisible. And I think, again, it's that mindset that, oh, this is a weakness thing. And I think there's still some of it in society in the way we portray it in the media. Like if you watch, I'm a big crime junkie. I like criminal shows. So if I watch Criminal Minds, almost always every episode for like 8 seasons, it's someone who is like experiencing a psychotic break or experiencing some kind of hallucination or delusion. They're obviously having a mental health event. And that just brings it back to, we are continuing to stigmatize it even in our like media representation of it, because we show these people that are criminals and statistically it's just not true. Like people with schizophrenia aren't going to come, not everyone's going to become criminal that has hallucinations or psychosis. In fact, the opposite is true. A lot of people that are having mental health events end up victims of police brutality or something else because they have someone go check on them and then the police don't know how to respond to it and they end up getting hurt or killed or worse or treated badly. So in effect, we're kind of continuing this conversation in that method because we continue to show it in media in a way that's uncomfortable. And I think we're getting better about anxiety and depression because people are starting to understand that. But when it comes to like our psychotic disorders, our mood disorders, bipolar, borderline, schizophrenia, people are still don't really understand them and are really scared of them. And even on Instagram, they're banning certain hashtags that these communities use because they indicate that they're self-harming or something else. So we need to keep having that conversation, and we need to open it up more. And we need to have more representation of people that have mental illnesses that maybe people don't understand. And I think there are good communities that are doing that, but it's still one of those things that we could definitely be doing a better job at.
And for somebody who has a bipolar disorder or a psychosis, what is the therapy process for something like that? How does that get resolved? What is the process?
So, a lot of these disorders are harder to manage in just one way. There's usually multiple coping strategies. There's definitely usually medication of some sort. It really depends on the person, what they're experiencing, how they treat it. They typically kind of treat the symptoms involved, like the hallucinations or the delusions or other things like that, and then or the depression or anxiety, and try to like kind of cocktail treat it, and then they have therapy as well. But some people end up having bigger issues and need to be committed, unfortunately, or have to spend some time in a psych ward. And that's just kind of, it depends. These are like more difficult to treat, and they're much more complex than some of your more, depression and anxiety. Though it can be chronic, and though it can also be really hard to treat, there are a lot more medications that get right to the root of the problem if it's a chemical imbalance. Like, there's serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Those are specifically used usually for anxiety and depression. But when it comes to some delusions, can be caused by your dopamine being off, or they can be caused by some other things going on. So they're a little bit harder to just say, this is what you do. This is A, this is B, of that kind of scenario.
Has CBD been shown to be beneficial at all in either calming people down and like helping with dealing with some other disorders? I know that there have been some medical studies done that showed the benefits of CBD, but I haven't really gone deep into the benefits of CBD.
Yeah, so CBD is pretty awesome. There's a lot of benefits for people who are dealing with anxiety and depression, but also for people who are dealing with chronic pain. But it's difficult because CBD is something that you have to know how to dose and understand like what dose you need. We can't say like, oh, this is, you take 20 milligrams and that's going to be perfect for you. CBD, it's like you kind of have to work it out and figure out what's going to work for you. So sometimes you don't figure out which dose is the best. And obviously everybody's body is so different. Everything, it's so interesting, like putting things in your body, like drugs or vitamins or supplements, whatever you choose, everybody reacts differently. So it's hard to be like, yes, like definitively that will work for everybody, because it may not. Some people actually experience anxiety on CBD, which seems, counterintuitive to the research, but we're just so uniquely made. There's no one answer for everybody. And I think that's one thing that's hard for someone who's struggling with mental illness, is that they might have to try 7 or 8 medications. They might eventually give up trying because it's just too hard. And then the side effects end up outweighing the benefits sometimes. And then sometimes the side effects cause you to have to take other medications too. So it's like, well, I'm taking this for my mental health, but then I'm taking this for the side effect that happened from the medication. So it's an interesting journey, because there's really no one right way to treat it. And that's why it can be really frustrating when people are dealing with it.
But for CBD, are there any harmful side effects? Is there like an upper threshold that you shouldn't cross if you were to take it? Or is...
I mean, they haven't found an upper threshold for marijuana in general. So CBD is just the non-psychoactive property.
Right. So you could technically take it and not have to worry about ODing on it if you wanted to sort of take it and figure out, what the best dose for you is.
Yeah, you always start small and
Yeah.
then you work your way up. You would never
Yeah.
just start at like 1,000 milligrams. That's typically, if you get like CBD tinctures, they're just like sublinguals. You just drop them on your tongue or put them in your coffee, whatever. But they usually start at 1,000, or they have like the upper limit of 1,000 milligrams in a 30 milliliter bottle, and you're supposed to take a dropper, like a milliliter dropper. So that's typically 1,000 divided by 30. I can't do the math right now, but that's like what the starting dose is, probably like 33 milligrams, I think. So it's not a high dosage. The only problem with CBD is it tends to be expensive, at least in the States. Like one of these milliliter droppers is going to be like $69. So you have to have $70 a month to have that. So that's kind of like a little bit cost prohibitive depending on what your spending is.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not cost effective. I mean, depends. $70, but how many doses are you getting? Like, how many times are you able to use that? I
So
would
you would
imagine
so for 70, that would be like a 30 milliliter dropper. So you'd be able to use it for a month.
for a
If you
month.
did a milliliter a day, if you did less than a milliliter, you could make it last longer. But typically, if you wanted to use a therapeutic dose, you do the full dropper that comes in the tincture.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to your earlier point on how like psychosis and how bipolar disorder, for example, is dealt with. And you were saying that often what happens is the symptoms are dealt with, but not necessarily the root cause. Is that just because the science is so new and we don't necessarily know what's causing these disorders? Like, is the root cause some type of trauma? Is it what's the root cause?
Yeah, the problem with psych disorders is, we can study the brain in certain ways, but we can't study them the way we study the rest of the body. We can't like open you up when you're living and figure out, oh, you have a chemical imbalance for serotonin. Like that's just we can't do that with you living. We have to like dissect your brain. That's just not something that's possible. So that's part of the problem. There's ways that you can look at the brain in different ways, but not necessarily to pinpoint exactly what's going to work for you. And there has been some testing that's been created that you can do that will show you like genetically what psych meds you might jive with and what you might not with. But that science is also kind of, I've heard it's iffy. Like I've had therapists say, yeah, it exists, but I wouldn't really trust it, or like that it's not a surefire way to understand if this is going to work for you. And yes, there's a lot of different theories from different psychologists about what caused different things. We're continuing to develop the science, and I think some practices that we had 50 years ago now would seem completely barbaric, and some practices maybe we have now will get that way, further along the line. Like we used to lobotomize people. That's obviously not a common practice anymore. And if you think about, sticking an ice pick up someone's eye up to their frontal lobe and swirling it around, like that sounds pretty intense. And no one really knew what you did there. I mean, yes, you changed the behavior, but you wouldn't know what you changed it into. You were kind of playing Russian roulette with someone's brain because you have no way of controlling exactly what you're changing. So I think there's so many different theories out there depending on what theory you follow, whether it's Jung or Freud or someone newer. You're going to get a different answer of what causes things. But a lot of CBT does, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, does rely on dealing with that root trauma, whatever it is, childhood trauma, future trauma. I mean, we're not going to come out without any trauma, and things that might be traumatic to you might not be traumatic to me. I've had the same, what I considered a traumatic experience with a friend earlier in my life. And we had that conversation. Did that, screw you up, or did that cause like PTSD for you? And she said, no. So it's how we personally deal with that trauma afterwards, and how we get it represented in the rest of our lives, and how it continues to follow us. And depending on how we heal from it and how we deal with it, I tend to not deal with things right when they happen. Like if I'm going through something that's serious, I just like shut down. Like I go into like mental lockdown mode to get through whatever it is. And a lot of other people would like freak out while it's happening, would panic, and then would release all that trauma, that adrenaline, all that norepinephrine, and it would just go away. But for me, I shut down, dissociate, and then weeks later, I actually relive whatever it was that was traumatic. And so it takes longer for me to get over things because that's the way I cope with it. I'm not saying that's a healthy coping mechanism. I'm just saying that's what I've developed over time to be the way that I cope with things that are scary or traumatic at the time.
So, if you have a disorder, and I'm just
Mhm.
thinking out loud here, is it fair to say that that's the result of some sort of a chemical imbalance? Almost
It could
always.
be. It could be, but not always, right? That's where the problem is. It's not always the chemical imbalance. Sometimes it's dealing with something traumatic. Sometimes it's dealing with, a lot of it comes from childhood abuse and other things, and having environments that weren't conducive to love and attachment can lead to anxiety and depression as you get older, depending on your attachment style, whether it's anxious or you're independent or whatever kind of experiences you had as a kid, or if you were bullied, can lead to your ego and your self representation as you get older. And that can cause you to have anxiety or depression or have an eating disorder, whatever other things. I think what we do know is like, more of the neurodivergent mental order disorders like ADHD or autism or things like that. That's obviously caused by some chemical components in the brain. But when it comes to anxiety, depression, and some of these others, it could be caused by, not having enough serotonin, not having too much dopamine, but it could also be caused by not receiving a certain attachment that we needed when we were younger. Or just chronic stress can build up over time. People who are oppressed, or people that are like people of color or LGBTQ or women, they tend to experience something called weathering, which is just like experiencing constant discrimination, or like something that just like kind of erodes your ability to handle stress, and that can cause chronic illness and anxiety and depression and obviously PTSD. So yeah, and the long and short of it, there is a chemical component, but not necessarily always in every disorder.
But it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for one to say that a chemical imbalance could likely have been caused by some sort of a traumatic event, be it in your childhood, be it chronic, as you call it, weathering. It could potentially have been caused by that, right? So
Yeah, and it could be genetic as well.
exactly, that was my point. So it's essentially a function of two things. It could be either genetic, or it could be some sort of an event. Basically, your interaction with the external environment, right?
Yeah,
Essentially, is what could cause it.
if you read about PTSD and like soldiers, they've actually looked at their brains and seen that their brains are producing less serotonin neurotransmitters. Like they actually have less branches in their brain that are creating serotonin. That's why they've said that ecstasy or MDMA could be a possible way for them to, reintroduce that back in a therapeutic session, obviously, in a controlled environment, obviously not in a recreational environment. But there's been some very interesting multidisciplinary studies about different types of psychogenic drugs that can help with PTSD and end of life and even cluster headaches. So it's very interesting research, and I'm interested to see it keep developing. The problem in the United States is that research gets very little funding because those are Schedule 1 drugs.
Yeah. In fact, another drug that's seen incredible results is psilocybin mushrooms. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but they're psychoactive. And
Mhm.
again, there are studies that have been done actually on soldiers who
Mhm.
are dealing with PTSD, and the results have been great.
Yeah.
um they're given a certain amount of dose, and they work with a doctor on resolving that issue, but the results have been extremely positive. But like you said, unfortunately the research doesn't get a lot of attention. And these types of solutions don't get a lot of attention just because I don't want to get into it, but there's a um, if these sorts of solutions do become a commonplace, then of course money gets diverted from other sources to these types of sources, and that of course creates problems for different parts of the system.
Right.
So
Well,
yeah.
I mean, here we have the war on drugs. So we can't declassify all of these drugs and decriminalize them because this war has to continue going. As you know, as much as we think that it might have been a failure or it doesn't make sense that we're continuing to push this narrative continues to happen. And unfortunately, even now with legalization of marijuana, we have legalized it, and then we kind of gatekeeped it from the people that started the whole thing. I mean, to invest in marijuana now in the United States, you have to have $1 million up front, venture capital, to start a new grow operation. That's obviously super cost prohibitive to anybody else. So we continue to have a marketplace for people who can't get into the legal market. And so we continue to put people in jail for something that's already legal. And we still have people in jail for something that's now legal that may have been illegal then. It just doesn't make much sense to me. And we're continuing to profit off of people. We're continuing to profit off of people of color, and we've taken away their ability to make money in this way and turned it into this very expensive, unnatural thing. And it's really frustrating to see people continue to get put in jail for something that they shouldn't anymore because it's legal.
Yeah, it's I mean, in Canada it's slightly different, of course. Like it's heavily regulated, but of course it's also I don't know what the requirement is to get in if you wanted to be a grower or just an organization in that space. I don't know what the requirements are, but I think Canada, of course, unlike the US, is has a more, I would say, they have a more favorable view when it comes to, and they have they're a lot more lenient when it comes to the marijuana space. One of the things that's interesting that you had mentioned earlier is you had spoken about how certain traumatic events can lead to the development of anxiety and stress and depression. And you had mentioned for yourself specifically that when you were diagnosed with anxiety, your symptoms were more physical, right? Like you had stomach pain and so on and so forth. But how does one recognize that they're dealing with some sort of an issue, and how does one take that first step to actually going and getting diagnosed and getting that validated?
Well, it's an interesting question because so many physical things can also be mental. And so you might have headaches and you might go get an MRI and you might see a neurologist and you might, go talk to your doctor about sinus headaches and then find out that it's psychosomatic, is what they call something that is a mental thing and also a physical thing. So I would say just everybody should go to therapy. Like everyone should have someone they talk to. I think it's wonderful to have an unbiased person who you can speak to, because in the end of the day, we all have something we need to talk to them about. Maybe you're not going through a mental health crisis, but like everyday stress from your job or anything else. I mean, heck, all of us are living during a global pandemic. There are things to talk about. There are things that have happened that have been difficult. Some people have lost loved ones because of COVID, unfortunately. And there's other things that have happened, social isolation. So I would think that everybody could benefit from some type of therapy. While I understand that therapy can also be a little cost prohibitive, like there are people, we have health insurance in the United States, and some health insurances will cover mental health and some will not. And there's some mental health doctors that will not take in health insurance, and you're looking at like $150 out of pocket, and that's difficult. So I think we need to have those conversations and recreate and innovate in our institutions. Like we really need to have these options for people. We need to have mental health options that are low cost or no cost. I mean, I don't think that we should be keeping that from anybody, those resources and that information. I try to do the best I can in my community on my website and to provide those resources. Like, where can you find resources like that? I make sure that I donate money and make sure that other people know that there are places you can donate money to where they actually cover costs of that. So I think it's like an institutional shift. I don't think it's anything one person can do to get these resources that we need. We just need to have these conversations and get people in political action committees to go out there and say, hey, we really need this. We need to put mental health first, because there was a time where we had a lot of state institute hospitals And then we had like deinstitutionalization happen. And then we basically just released all of these people and they had nowhere to go. So they became homeless. And, you know, people came back from wars and they had nowhere to go and they became homeless. So we have to do a better job with creating institutions that support this. And I understand that, you know, nobody wants to work for free. So it's a really hard thing to figure out, okay, what's the balance here? How can we provide these resources and also like get people paid that do these jobs? Because I think mental health professionals are just amazing. Like I think that that's one of the greatest professions, and it's got to be one of the hardest professions too. Like I really think when it comes to medical professionals and teachers, you know, everyone is just so underappreciated, especially during COVID. We went from saying, oh, y'all are our heroes to, oh, you just need to open up schools again. You're just being like, come on, just like my kid needs somewhere to go. And I just, it's so weird how we shifted our attitudes about people so quickly. And I just feel for anybody in medical professions right now, and then anybody that's a teacher, because I can't imagine how you navigate that, especially in states where masks aren't required and kids are coming to school COVID positive, and the stress of that alone, you're going to need someone to talk to. And so I just, man, this past year has just been unimaginable. Like if you told me that this is what we're going to experience for 2 years a few years ago, I would just look at you and laugh, because this has just been unlike anything I would have ever expected to happen or anticipated.
Yeah, it's I totally agree with you. I mean, I find myself just every now and then just stopping and thinking about the world that we're living in and how it used to be before COVID and how it's forever changed. And I don't know. I mean, I'd like to be optimistic and hope that, you know, there will be an end to this someday and that we'll be able to return to how life was before. But I just, I don't know, unfortunately, if there'll be an end to this. And I don't know what type of a lasting impact this will have on individuals who've had to go through it. You know, whether you're in your later years, whether you're a child, I just don't know what the impact that will have on you from a trauma standpoint, from a stress standpoint, and just from an anxiety standpoint as well. Like, who knows what's coming next, right? Like, even if we get done with this, like, what's next? Will this ever end? I wanted to ask you about you mentioned therapy. When you say everybody should go for therapy, are you talking about going to see a psychiatrist? Are you talking about alternative forms of therapy? And if so, you know, if it is in fact $150 per session or whatever that amount is, clearly it's a pretty expensive it's a pretty expensive ask, right? So are there communities, are there resources, are there support systems available outside of the formal therapy what's the word I'm looking for, avenue, I guess?
Mm-hmm. So when I say therapy, I'm speaking specifically about talk therapy, like going to someone and talking. Psychiatrists have a beautiful place in this world and have a beautiful place in like the understanding, but I wouldn't go to a psychiatrist to have a conversation. You go to a psychiatrist to get a medication. That's their jobs. They're not going to sit down and talk through those conversations with you. If you have a conversation with a psychiatrist, they're going to be like, okay, did you discuss that with your therapist? Psychiatrists and therapy or therapists kind of work hand in hand. You know, your therapist might talk to you for a certain amount of time and think, oh, okay, maybe, you know, you're presenting some of the symptoms of anxiety or something like that. And then they'll kind of refer you to a psychiatrist, and then the psychiatrist will do the part of, okay, let's dose you, let's figure out what the best medication to start you on is based on what other medications you take or what your weight is or any other factors, whether you're a woman or man. We'll figure all that out, and then they'll keep up with you and your medications. But your talk therapy is really more to have those conversations. And I used to think that you would go to talk therapy and you'd have your conversation and then you'd leave. And then, you know, the talk therapy would happen again. And I've been going to therapy for a lot of years. So it's sad that it recently dawned on me that, talk therapy is where you start learning, what tools should I be implementing for the next week or 2 weeks or however long before you see another therapist, or like, what are my coping strategies? Help me with my like anxiety toolbox or things that I can use to go forward. And then the next week or 2 weeks is like your implementation stage. Like, okay, I started meditating, or I'm doing this regularly, or when I find myself getting really overwhelmed, I practice square breathing. Like, it's really getting into that experimentation mode of like putting these real world examples and then going back to the therapist and reviewing the past week and saying, this is what worked for me, this is what was harder, this is what I think I can work on next. Instead of when you just go to therapy and you just talk, you just relive trauma. All you're doing is just reintroducing that trauma and that stress feeling again. And yes, it feels great to release it onto someone and then leave. But if you don't pull out those tools and that understanding, you're not really growing or healing in the process. You're just reliving trauma, dumping it, and then moving on.
Yeah. So talk therapy, how much does that cost? Is that something that an average person can benefit from? What's the
It really depends. There are low cost and no cost options. They're few and far between. They're typically in like big cities. We'll have more of them, like mental health centers or community centers or things like that. There's the National Alliance for Mental Illness, NAMI. They have a lot of resources. There's American Psychology Today. You can look up different psychologists there and find low cost or no cost. And then also, if you have health insurance in the United States, there's certain doctors and therapists that fall under, depending on what your health insurance is, they would fall under that. And you would end up paying like a copay, like maybe $20 or something, or nothing, depending on what your behavioral health insurance looks like. So it just really depends. And I don't know how it is in Canada because I don't live in Canada and I don't do a lot of researching in Canada, and most of my audience is in the United States. So I don't know what kind of resources y'all have specifically, but I know that that's what we have to offer in the United States. And I do think that we still need more. And there are nonprofits that exist to help cover the costs. I'm trying to think. The Loveland Foundation, they cover costs for Black women and Black children for therapy. That's one I can think of off the top of my head. I always like to donate to them. They're a great organization. If you have money, definitely think about donating to them. If you're in a real crisis, you can always call the suicide hotline. That's free. And they'll be with you. But if you're not in like a super mental health crisis, that obviously isn't the most appropriate choice, just because you don't want to tie up the lines for someone who obviously is needing immediate attention. So
yeah, and I think it's so important that you mentioned the need to go to talk therapy, but then outside of that, developing that game plan for yourself, right? Like, what should I be doing outside of this therapy session for me to combat anxiety or whatever it is that you're combating, be it breathing. My mom is a certified yoga teacher, and all I hear about on a fairly regular basis is the importance of breathing. So when you mention breathing, there's tremendous benefits. There's many different types of breathing. I don't know if you're familiar with Wim Hof, who is known as he's known as the Iceman. But I actually tried to do one of his breathing techniques as well. And honestly, like it's extremely, I definitely felt something. Like there's definitely something going on there. I don't exactly know what that is. The one that I did was essentially what you're doing is you're exhaling more than you are inhaling. So you're reducing the amount of oxygen in your system, and that causes tremendous benefits for quite a few different things. So breathing is extremely important. You did mention one of the resources for individuals who perhaps might be on suicide watch, or perhaps individuals who are thinking about that. And of course, it is also Suicide Prevention Month. So it's something that I'd love to get more into. It's suicide is something that's important for me, just because I do know an individual who recently, this was prior to COVID, but who committed suicide, and it was extremely shocking for everybody that knew that individual, just because I think it sort of came out of nowhere.
Mhm.
In your interactions, or at least in my interactions with this individual, I had no idea whatsoever that this is something that would ever occur. In fact, the last time I spoke with this person, this person was extremely joyful and was
Mhm.
looking forward to what the future had in store, but extremely sad when that happened. And it's an issue that I think we are likely, I don't know what the stats are, but I would imagine in COVID, perhaps the suicide numbers have increased significantly, but I don't know.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you say like you had no idea because that tends to be people's response after a suicide is it does, we think that suicide is going to look a certain way. Everyone's like, I'd be able to tell, I would know if someone around me was that sad or upset or feeling that isolated. But the truth is, you really don't. And people are just like, watch for the signs. And yes, there are some obvious things to watch for. Like if someone is starting to sell all their stuff or like seems like they're saying a goodbye to you or anyone else, that's something that you can watch for. But in most cases it's just people that are you see on normally basis that are like always happy or always cheerful. I mean, we look at Robin Williams or anybody else in the celebrity realm that committed suicide, you didn't really know that that was going to happen, and I think that's often how it is. So my thought is, just constantly be checking in with people. Never, go a day where you don't tell people that you're grateful for them or that you care about them. Always hold space for people. I don't like to ask, like, how are you or are you doing okay? Because I feel like it's a loaded question and it's maybe not as easy for people to answer. But I would like to say, like, I'm holding space for you. Like, if you need me, I'm here. Not, hey, how are you doing? And then the onus is back on them to like explain it to you. And I think that we need to get past this, how are you doing fine conversation. Like if someone asks, how are you doing? I like go out of my way to be like, well, today I'm not feeling great because, blah, 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 XYZ. I'm not going to tell you I'm feeling fine if you're close to me. I'm going to let you know how I'm feeling because I hope you'll give me that same courtesy. And I do want to know how you're really feeling, like genuinely. I don't want to ask you, how are you feeling, just as a, like polite conversation. I want to know, can I support you somehow? So I think we need to get past this surface level conversation where we check in with people and say, no, how are you really feeling? And can I do anything to help you?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting thing. I think in the corporate world, it's something that you hear all the you hear all the time,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think it's just as you mentioned to have that polite conversation starter. It's used as that, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely something interesting to take note of, especially if you are asking that of somebody who perhaps is not doing well and who doesn't feel comfortable sharing how they're actually doing with you, what sort of impact that has on them. So that's an interesting thing. When it comes to suicide and mental health, are you seeing a rise in suicide that's linked directly to, I would imagine, some sort of an underlying mental health issue is the cause for that suicide? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, in most cases, there are actually even some like if you start a new medication, some medications actually have one of the side effects is suicidal ideation.
Like which
And
ones?
depending, huh?
Like which one? Sorry. Like
There's just some medications. Typically, they're psych medications, but other medications can have some interactions. But we just have to be careful about anything that like leads to suicidal ideation. Like if you're starting a new psych drug, definitely have a support system. Like not just like your doctor and your therapist, but like have someone checking in to make sure you're not experiencing intrusive thoughts or anything weird, because it might come on slowly. But the thing is, when you start having a very strong and very loud thought that this is the only thing that you can do, like this is the only way you will be free, or this is the only way things will get better for you, it becomes kind of impossible to stop that reaction if you don't have anybody else in your corner that's kind of like pulling you back from the metaphorical ledge. So yes, a lot of mental health issues can arise and cause suicide, but also like sexual abuse, any kind of abuse, trauma, having, anything like that can also cause it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like a mental disorder, but having a traumatic event happen to you or something of a nature that, you know, was shocking or uncomfortable and you didn't have an outlet to express it properly at the time, that can cause issues. Just feeling trapped in your own life. Like, oh my God, there's no way I can get out of this. The only way I can get out is if I end my life. Like that's part of it, you know, or oh, nobody will care about me if I leave, or nobody will miss me. Getting bullied, that's a huge, at least in adolescent suicides, that is a huge proponent of if someone is being bullied at school. And not even just being bullied at school now, you can be cyberbullied. So your bullies can find you wherever they are. It used to be when I was a kid, you know, you get bullied at school and you could go home and escape it. But now, like, bullies live everywhere, all over the internet, and you'll never escape them. I've heard like very horrible stories about like kids who had hate Instagrams about other kids and like had all these kids follow it, and like just the constant torture that it would be to be on social media constantly and then not be able to get away from someone who is abusing you. That could also be a factor in suicide. And, you know, just being different, whether you're a person of color, whether you're LGBTQ, feeling like you don't fit into the community, that can also definitely be a preemptive to someone who ends up wanting to end their life.
Yeah, you mentioned social media use, and I think I may have read this on your blog. One of your posts had been you, at some point, you felt as though your use of social media had increased your anxiety and your stress, and you wanted to take a break from it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is that true? Is that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The problem of being online all the time is you have to be on. Like you have to be on all the time. And though things are curated and you get to show how much, you get to choose how much of your life you're showing to people, you're spending a lot of time online. You're spending a lot of time seeing other people, and comparison can really end up being the thief of your own joy. Like if you're looking at someone else and being like, they have the 50,000 followers, why don't I have 50,000 followers? Or their relationship looks so great. Like they look happy all the time. He always gives her flowers. Why don't I always get flowers? We're just seeing this microcosm of someone's life, this very curated microcosm, but it can feel very real and very visceral to people. So I totally understand how that felt. I was experiencing a lot of burnout where I was creatively spent. Like I didn't know what I wanted to talk about anymore. I didn't know how I wanted to show up. I was reading these things on Instagram that if you want to grow, you have to post like 5 pictures a week and 4 reels and 1 IGTV. And I also have a full-time job. So I was just trying to battle and like juggle all these things. And in the end, I was like, I just can't do this right now. I have to step away because it's so hypocritical of me to be on here and say, protect your mental health. And I'm just like struggling and suffering under the weight of all this pressure. So I stepped away for a few weeks, I think. And I do that sometimes. I take a social media break and I come back, and I just want to be as good for the community as I can. And you can't pour from an empty cup. So like, I have nothing to give you. I'm not going to show up because that's just not, I'm not giving you any value. And I'm just bringing myself to a place where I can't deliver anything because I'm exhausted.
Yeah, and I think it'd be extremely important to hear directly from you because you are considered an influencer. So hearing directly from an influencer, for all of those out there who are looking to become influencers like yourself and develop that following on Instagram, what advice would you give them on how to handle the beast that is social media?
My advice is 2 things. One, be yourself. And I know this sounds so cliche, but be authentic to who you are. Don't try to be like someone else. Like, don't, just because a formula is working for someone else, don't copy it because you're just going to show up as a watered down version of them. You need to be yourself. You need to find what unique voice you have because that's what people want, right? Social media is all about being social. It's about having this 2-way conversation. If you get on social media and you don't engage with anyone, you don't answer your DMs, you don't talk in your comments, you don't talk to other people, you're not using social media. You're basically just using a megaphone to get your message out. there needs to be reciprocal conversations between people. And I really think showing up authentically is really important. And the other thing that I think is important is show some of yourself, be part of your social media. Don't be a caricature of yourself, be who you are. That could mean different things to different people. Like some people are going to show their family members, are going to show other people in their life. I have a husband, but he doesn't typically end up on my Instagram because he's not comfortable with it. And I'm not going to put him in a position where he's not comfortable. But I know a lot of people who share a lot of their relationships online. Sometimes I get on and I cry when I'm having a bad day. I'm not saying that's the best way to use it, but then I have all these people that will support me. And it feels really nice to have a community of people that are like, hey, I'm sorry you're going through that. Like, I want to help you. It's like having genuine internet friends is amazing. I made a lot of my really good friends in Houston from the blogger community. So interact with people, use it the way it's supposed to be used, and not, don't go into it with the mindset that I need this many followers or I want to start making this amount of money on here. Like, go into it with the idea that I want to grow authentically. I want to have conversations with my followers. I want to make internet friends, and you'll have a much better time than like this pressure. And as someone who had a lot of followers and then lost a lot of followers, I can tell you that I made this goal of reaching 10K, and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be so happy when I reach 10K. And then I did it. And you know what? I felt nothing. All I felt was, okay, now the next 10K. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't put anything into it where I was like, wow, I'm really proud of myself. I looked at the number go up and I said, okay, now we go higher. And then when I lost those followers, I said, it really didn't matter. It didn't make a difference. So for anybody who's struggling to grow or feels like a certain number is like the key answer, I tell you, like, you won't feel it. It won't be that exciting. You'll just look for the next achievement. Like, you're always going to be pushing towards something else. And if you're someone who's a perfectionist or doesn't easily like stay satisfied by things, that's always going to be where you're going. Like, your next $100 million, or you're going to lose 5 pounds and you want to lose 10 pounds. Like, there's always going to be something. So what I like the most, and going back to what you're talking about your mom and yoga, something that an instructor has taught me is being in the past, rumination will cause depression. Being too in the future, anticipation will cause anxiety. Where you need to set as frequently as you possibly can is in the present. And it's so difficult to be present, especially if you're like a planner and you're constantly moving on to the next thing. But breathe and meditate and sit in the present as often as you can, because otherwise you're going to miss everything. And everything that you thought was important, or anything that you were like took advantage of or took granted for, you're going to look back and say, oh my God, that was a moment that I should have been there. And that happened to me during COVID, because I used to go sit at this bar on Sundays and watch go with my friends, and we'd watch football all day, and we'd play fantasy football, and my husband and her husband would hang out, and we would hang out. And I started to be so upset by this routine. Like, I was like, oh, we're going to Christians again. We're going to watch this again. And then the year that I sat at home and we couldn't do that, I missed it so much. I missed having that routine, and I complained about it and grumbled about it and hated it. And I was like, man, that was really a beautiful time that I spent with my friends. So recognize that, sit in the moment, and don't get too ahead of yourself. It's good to plan, but it's also good to understand that plans never go the way that you want them to.
Yeah, no, I love the advice. I think it's all great advice, and I completely agree with us living in the now and the present. I think that's key. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this clip and I'm going to share it with my mom, and she's going to be so happy, because just the other day, in fact, in our group, she had shared an image that said exactly that, like, live in the present. I think it was something along the lines of the present is a gift, so treat it like one, and the future is something. But every now and then we'll get that, so I'll make sure to to share this clip with my mom and she'd be extremely happy. I totally agree with you. There is one thing though that I feel as though perhaps as you continue to grow on Instagram, you may not be able to do, and that's the engagement, that's the interaction,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like if you get 4,000 comments on a post, like
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. It's the higher you grow, and that's when really being yourself on stories really comes into play, like really sharing those bits of your life. Because you're right, when engagement gets out of control, I've had a couple of videos on TikTok that kind of blew up a little bit, and just like trying to answer 9,000 comments was not feasible. But I mean, like, try to spend time answering as many as you can. I'm obviously not 4,000, but like, try to communicate with people, maybe different people in each post, or maybe someone's saying something really relevant. Obviously someone's like cool or something, but if someone is really trying to start that conversation, I always leave the door open for that.
okay, and switching gears and talking about what actually led you to taking a break from social media, and you mentioned that that was burnout.
Mm-hmm.
And I know one of the topics that we wanted to speak about, that you are passionate about and that you actually wrote a blog on, is corporate burnout.
Yep.
I'd love to hear from you on what your definition is of burnout, as well as your solutions on how you can overcome it.
So I feel like burnout is just this deep, deep exhaustion. Like, it's, you feel it in your bones, you feel it all around you, but you can't stop doing things. Like, you look at your to-do list and they just continue getting longer, but the motivation to do them just continues, being minimal to zero. And you're forcing yourself through the day. You're like getting through it, but it's like really rough. Like, everything just feels like a struggle. Like, nothing feels easy, and everything feels hard, and everything just makes you more exhausted. And even if you're getting immense amounts of sleep, you still wake up every day just like dreading the next day. And I actually watched a TikTok that said that burnout takes 3 to 5 years to get over, and all of us are taking like 1 week vacations, and that's why we come back from our vacation and we're like, I don't feel any more relaxed or better after doing this, because none of us can actually take the amount of time it would take us to get over burnout. So we just live in a constant state of burnout, basically.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I totally agree. I'm of the like I'm on the side where the longer the vacation is, the better. So for example, like if you have the option of taking a month off versus like 4 different breaks that are a week long, just do the month,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because then at least you'll feel as though you've taken some time off, versus if you're taking a week or two off, usually, and if you're flying abroad and like that involves jet lag, then you're dealing with
Mm-hmm.
that the first couple of days, and then by the time you get off that, you're getting ready to head back, and you don't really feel like you've taken enough time off. So I'm definitely in the camp that if you are able to take more time, do it, versus taking more frequent breaks but shorter breaks.
Right. Well, and people always take shorter breaks because the longer breaks mean that when you come back, there's even more work to have. And especially in corporations, I mean, nothing stops. My husband's like, he works here in Houston as and like with his dad. And so they work in a very small business where everybody here is in Houston. And he's like, oh, like, there's a storm. And I'm like, yeah, I work for a global company. I'm a microcosm of who they care about. We're like very small comparatively, like nothing stops for just hurricanes in Houston. He's like, oh, I just figured. I'm like, no, like, if I don't have internet, I don't have internet. I'll figure it out. But that company is going to keep going. That train's going to keep moving down the track with or without me. So I think that's part of it, why people don't take longer breaks, is because you get back from even a 5 day and you've got 300 emails, and it takes you 2 days of that next week just to, get your like claw out of the hole that you're in. And then you have all the new meetings that are coming in and all the new tasks. So I think that's why people don't take longer, because then the next week is even more daunting. But I do envy our European counterparts, because they just bow out for 6 weeks and nobody bothers them, and we don't have that luxury here.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we can replicate some of the models in that East Asia is using. So, of course, there was I don't know if you heard about the 4 day work week being a
Mm-hmm.
huge success in terms of increasing productivity. I think perhaps that's something that we may explore in North America down the road. Even though I think just given the culture here, perhaps it'll be a difficult sell. But of course, like
Yeah.
that has been shown to be extremely beneficial in terms of productivity. Going back to burnout, so you mentioned having little to no motivation. You mentioned being, of course, like a massive factor is the chronic stress, right, that you're
Mm-hmm.
facing at work as well. A lot of people experience it every now and then. We'll have conversations where people be mentioning the need to take breaks, the need to take time
Mm-hmm.
off. But in terms of overcoming it and not being able to take time off, I know on your blog you had mentioned things like making a to-do list. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of those things that we can do to overcome burnout?
I really like to-do lists personally, and there's something so like satisfying about crossing things off of the to-do list. And I also have ADHD, so I'm not focused usually. So like a to-do list just like reins me in and makes sure that I know everything I'm supposed to do. But in the process of like if you're in a corporate burnout moment or like you're getting close to burnout, I would say like make a to-do list, make a full to-do list, like a comprehensive one, and then start to weight or rank what has to happen. Like I only have this much energy probably to do maybe 3 hours of like straight writing or something like that. Then find the tasks that you have the energy to do, just so you can mark something off because you'll feel better about it and you'll get something off the to-do list. Don't try to accomplish 25 things when you're feeling like you're close to burnout. Try to accomplish like 2 or 3 really high level priority things, and you'll feel a lot better about it. Another thing is called, there's a book called Eat the Frog, and it talks all about like we procrastinate all of the biggest like heavy items that we have to do, and then we just do all these like little tiny things that are kind of inconsequential but don't really drive that much value, but it's so we can get them off our list. We're like, oh well, I can mark all this, I can mark 10 things off, and then we just leave this one thing because we know it's going to take a lot of time, we know it's going to take a lot of effort, and we don't want to get to it. But Eat the Frog is all about doing that thing, like just do that thing, because the minute you do that thing, two things will happen. One, you'll realize it really wasn't as bad as you were making out to be. Like there's things that I dreaded for like weeks where I was like, oh, I really have to do that. And then I finally sit down and do it because I think it's going to take like 4 hours, and it takes me like maybe an hour. And then it's done. And it's a huge item. And it's something that maybe drives like incremental value, or it like drives actual revenue, like those things. Like just eat the frog, do it, and then get it done, and then don't do anything else. That's fine. Eat the big frog and then say, okay, I did it. Like thankfully in my corporate environment I have a lot of flexibility. One, I work from home, so I can get up and like go run outside at my lunch break or something else. Like I know that a lot of people, not everyone has that flexibility. And I know some days I don't have that, where I'm literally butt in seat from 9 to 5 in meetings, and like I barely get up to pee or eat. But like also another good thing is to block intentional time on your calendar. Like um literally just block it like for yourself and say, this is focus time. I have to do this task. Because what happens in the corporate world is we have meetings, like so many meetings that maybe didn't need to be meetings always, but like then you have time to do the things you need to do, because sometimes we end up in so many meetings that we don't even get done the things that actually are valuable. And a lot of those meetings have no structure, have no reason to exist, and then you've accomplished nothing all day. And it might feel good because you're like, oh, I'm done with the day, I did all those meetings, but then you didn't do anything else, you just sat in meetings all day. So definitely finding intentional time. Like my manager even like put like 2 windows on our calendars at like different times of the week that were like 2-hour blocks, and just said, nobody can schedule meetings in this time for you guys, get this stuff done. And then also over the summer, every other Friday, we had a wellness Friday where you could go and do whatever was for your mental or physical wellness, whether however you use that, like nobody was asking you, but you could use that to do whatever. One time I used it to go like hiking, and another time I used it to get a massage. It just kind of depends on how you wanted to use it. But having that day was so helpful, because then you knew like it was a 4-day work week. It was nice. I definitely ascribe to that being a great model. But yeah, I would say like make your entire list, eat the frog, and then, schedule time in to do either the focus activities you need to do, or just like, I like to midday meditate. Like after lunch, I like to sit outside on my patio, spend 10 minutes on Headspace doing a meditation, journal for 5 minutes, and then go back to whatever it was I was supposed to do. Can I do it every day? No. But do I aim for it? Yes, because it helps me get refocused, and it helps me be nice to other people too. Like helps me be less short. So I would say do that for yourself. Like add some focus time in, especially if you're near burnout or you're in burnout. Like just continuing to burn the wick at both ends, it's not going to work out well. You're not going to even produce well. If you're really burnt out, you're not producing well regardless, because you're kind of, you're throwing in the towel a little bit. Like you're kind of half-assing it sometimes when you're burnt out. You're like, I don't know, I just want to get this done. So I would say try not to get to the point of burnout, but if you are there, take these steps to like reel it back in. And if you can have a vacation, great, take a longer one. But if that's not an option, at my company, we have like the use it or lose it. So you either use your vacation or you lose it. You don't get to roll it over. So it's hard to take long vacations, because it just doesn't exist, especially if you're like 5 years and under, because, seniority, you can take, those people have like 20,000 days and they're like, I just haven't used any of them. I'm like, go use your vacation time, Martha. Like, yeah, please.
Yeah. How many days do you get?
3 weeks.
Okay. So is that 15 business days?
So I get 15 business days and I think I get closer to like 18 days, because I get 1 floating holiday and 2 whatever free days. I don't remember what they call them, but yeah, closer to 18, but yeah, it's fine. And then we shut down for 2 weeks at Christmas. So that's actually really nice. I get a long break for Christmas and New Year's, but then you come back and it's just like everyone's been gone. So it's just like chaos when you get back in January. But I do appreciate that time. It's nice to have that time. That I didn't used to have that at other companies, so that's nice.
Yeah, I'm extremely fortunate to be working for the organization that I work for, because there's so much emphasis on work-life balance and maintaining your mental health. Like we get, we're encouraged to take time off during that lunch hour. We're encouraged to block our calendars on Fridays and like to use that time to catch up on stuff that we haven't done. We have a ton of resources, and quite honestly, like coming from a consulting firm, like coming from like a startup consulting firm where it was quite the opposite. It's been an extremely pleasant change, and it's just so nice to have your leaders support you on that as well. It's just it's great to have that. So but I wanted to come back to something that you said, and I think it's so important. Like for you, you mentioned having taken those 10 minutes and getting on Headspace, because it's going to help you de-stress and relieve some of that stress. It's the same for me. Like for me, working out in the morning is critical, just because it makes me less grumpy, and then like it makes me more willing to take on the day's challenges too.
Yep.
So go ahead.
Yeah, I noticed this. I was starting, I like to work out in the morning too, like before the workday. And I started noticing that I was like hitting my snooze button and like up until I needed to get up for work. And it was making me feel like so chaotic. Like everything was rushed. I was already behind for the day. So I made a commitment to myself to like stop hitting the snooze button today. I was like, you're going to get up. And I went outside and I ran a 5K and I came back and I had time to like make breakfast and do other stuff. And it was so nice to have that time to myself again, because getting up and just immediately rushing into work is not the way you want to start your day. So everyone get up a little bit earlier, like make yourself a nice cup of coffee or get a nice cup of coffee or whatever, do whatever like is enjoyable for you in the morning, because we often think the only time we have is like the evenings after a work day. And then there's something called like, it's like, it's like nighttime rebellion. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but it's like you stay up later at night because so much of your day has been taken up by work that you like don't want to go to bed because you don't want to sacrifice this free time that exists for you. So then you end up going to bed later and later. And then when you wake up, you're obviously exhausted because you didn't get enough sleep. So that's something that, you know, if you take some time in the morning and take some time in the evening, you won't feel that need to like just hoard all this time in the afternoon to get back that time that you're missing out on.
Yeah, I've had friends tell me that, and I remember this one time very clearly. This was back when I was working in consulting. I frequently would come back home quite late, and this was pre-COVID. And I remember there was this one time when I came back home at like 9:15 or like 9:30, and then I was in bed by like 10, and I was talking to one of my friends, and he was like, "Wait, so you didn't like wind down or anything? You just came back home and then went right to sleep?" And I was like, "Yep." But like I feel like I'm an outlier because my routine is quite like I follow a pretty rigid routine. At least I did for the longest time, and I'm trying to bring that in with things starting to reopen now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's so important to have that and to know what those things are in your toolbox that will work for you, right? Like just going back to what you're saying earlier, like how do you deal with anxiety? How do you deal with stress? Like certain jobs, the stress level is so high. And I remember when I used to work in consulting, I used to go to the gym every morning, and over here in the winter, it gets like horribly cold. It gets like minus 30 degrees Celsius some days, which is
Mm-hmm.
horrible.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but like I would still somehow, and looking back, I don't know how I was able to do this, but I would wake up at 6 o'clock, I'd be at the gym, and then like I would work out. I'd use the sauna. I'm a massive proponent of using the sauna just because it's got really good benefits in terms of like bringing inflammation levels down and recovery and so on and so forth. But I
Mm-hmm.
would use that, and like by the time I would be done using the sauna, I would feel as though like I'd be ready to just take over whatever challenges that I had, or like take on whatever challenges that I had. And I would go in and I would tell a lot of the people at work, I'd be like, look, you guys should try this, because I would see a lot of people dealing with stress. And you would
Mm-hmm.
see that come out, you know, in the form of them having like 15 cans of Red Bull, or like
Right.
whatever that behavior was, right? And I'd be like, look,
Mm-hmm.
this has worked for me. It may not work for you, but maybe you want to try it. And so I wanted to ask you, when it comes to like maintaining that mental health, we didn't really speak about some of the other things that have been shown to be beneficial, and they may not be beneficial in every single case, but like for example, getting adequate sleep,
Mm-hmm.
making sure that that you do pay attention to what it is that you're eating, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and then that exercise component as well. Like, is that something that you advocate for? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. I think so. I started running during COVID because I didn't have anything to do. Basically, I think there's two camps of people. You either got really depressed and you ate and drank a lot, or you were bored all the time, so you got really active, or you learned a new language, or you started a hobby, or you did a little bit of both. But I started running outside because I didn't have to be around people and I didn't have access to a gym. So I started running outside, and I found that to be like the mindfulness activity for me because it's the only time where I'm not thinking about other things. Like I can only think about put one foot in front of the other and keep breathing, and like I listen to music. That's it. That's all that can go through my head. I can't be wondering like what am I going to do later? I got to make this to-do list in my head. No, there's no space in there because I'm just like trying to concentrate, stay alive. So I think for someone with an anxiety, cardio is really great. I had a therapist who always said cardio was great. I never wanted to listen to him. I always said, boo, I hate cardio. I'd rather lift weights, whatever. I don't want to do cardio. Cardio sucks. And now I've started running and I'm obsessed. Like I love running. So I don't think it works for everybody. I know there's a lot of people that never want to run anywhere. And some people don't experience runner's high. Like I am happy to get those endorphins after mile 3. So like I really enjoy it. And it helps me stay present and awake for the rest of the day. But also, like we said, meditating is really great. I like journaling. I think there's great ways to either journal free write or like prompt write. I have a prompt book that I got on Amazon. I think it's like 365 days. Like you could do a whole year of prompts. Another thing that I like to do is I like to just set 5 minutes on my phone, and I have like an app called Daily Journal, or I think it's called Day One, but it's just a journal app. You can put text in it, you can put photos in it, you can put whatever you want in it. I just set it for 5 minutes and I just write free stream of conscious writing. sometimes it's eloquent and beautiful, and sometimes it's just garbage and doesn't matter, but it gets a lot of stuff out of me. And maybe I look back at it and I'm like, oh, I was feeling really stressed and glad that I took that time. So that drinking enough water, getting enough water for your body is so good. Like, you never realize that it's so important. Like, you have a headache all day and you can't figure out why. People drink way too much caffeine, take too many stimulants, and like don't drink enough water. And there is like water and coffee, but like really just drinking water or getting like the right fruits and veggies, just like doing things that everyone tells you are good for your health is going to help with your mental health too. It's not going to fix a mental health disorder. It's not going to fix a crisis. And I think there's an important distinction there, because there are people that are like, why don't you get up and go for a run? Like, yes, it will help. It does help. But like, I could still have a panic attack on my run, or I could still have a panic attack when I get home. It's not going to solve the issue for people that are actually experiencing mental disorders. So I think like that kind of advice is dangerous, to just be like, get up, like just get up and run, or like just eat healthy all the time. Because the truth is, sometimes I do everything in my toolbox and it does not help. Some days I still feel anxiety. If I square breathe and I meditate and I journal and I eat right and I drink enough water and I exercise, some days I just wake up feeling anxious. And on those days, I think it's important to just be kind to yourself. Like, don't berate yourself for the fact that I've done all this for me. Like, why isn't this working? Like, just be like, all right, today's an anxiety day. What do I do on anxiety days? Well, I like to curl up in a heated blanket, and I like to eat ice cream, and I like to watch a movie or something. Like, just be kind to yourself regardless of what season you're in. And some days are going to be hard regardless of what coping strategies you employ. Maybe they all fail that day, and then you just pull out whatever you got and comfort yourself, self-soothe, however that looks for you. Some people, that's like bubble baths. It's whatever self-care is for you. And I think self-care has gotten this weird name around it for like women to be like, I have to take a bubble bath. Self-care is only like getting a spa treatment. Like, self-care is whatever helps protect your mental health. Self-care could be just like setting boundaries. Like, self-care could be getting rid of toxic people in your life. It can look like so many different things. It's not just spa days or eating comfort food. It's anything that helps you feel better.
Yeah, I love it. I couldn't agree more with what you said. And I think a lot of the things you said actually resonated very much so with me, just because I sort of went to the same thing. So I was one of those people who did not like to run. I would do my weight training and do my cardio in the gym, and then COVID happened and I was like, okay, like what do I do now? So I started running, and I actually started to enjoy it quite a bit. So much so that I actually just went the other day and ran a 5K myself, and that runner's high at the end of it, it's incredible.
There's something after 3 miles, man. It's like mile 3. I don't know what it is about mile 3, but that's like it.
Yeah, I think it depends on your, like, where you are in your running journey. Like, I have a friend of mine like who runs like marathons, so for him perhaps like mile 3 wouldn't probably be like the
Right.
like the limit or the threshold, but it's great. I think the advice that you've given has been I couldn't agree more with it. I think there's some really good advice just throughout this conversation. I could continue talking about mental health just because it's a topic that I am extremely passionate about, but I know we've been speaking for about an hour and a half, and I think we pretty much covered a lot of really good topics. Was there something that perhaps you wanted to talk about or just share or promote or anything?
No, I think we covered it all. I mean, we went through the gambit of things. So it was awesome. It was an awesome conversation.
Thank you so much for being on. It was a pleasure, and I'd love to have you on down the road to see, and to continue the conversation on mental health. I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's a topic that does not get enough awareness and recognition. And I think eventually what we will continue to see is that it'll become a topic that is more and more prevalent in our discussions, and something that people will feel more comfortable speaking about, just because it exists. We're starting to see it in many different shapes and forms, and especially with the pandemic, it's not going anywhere. It's just getting exaggerated. So I'd love to have you on, and we can continue the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. If anybody wants to find me, I'm at Rose and Ruffles. That's my handle. And thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
My pleasure. And for those who are listening, again, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. We're available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. Yep, I will see you on the next one.